Anyhow, well, at risk of disrupting everyone, let's get going on the next talk. It's the final talk, so I'll go through it. What we're doing is we've got a new project on sustainable marketing accountability. So I kind of want to sort of introduce that, make sure everyone's on the same page, and then make sure we know why we're doing it as much as anything else. So, I managed to turn it off. So this is the project. Basically, marketing's been called to play a central role in corporate sustainability initiatives, which includes a lot of things like brand purpose, compliance, communications, go-to-market strategy. Yeah, there's a lot of lack of clarity in exactly what marketing is going to do and how we're going to do it. So what we're going to be trying to do is provide expert advice to the ISO committee on sustainability reporting. We're going to get some definitions together. We'll talk a bit more about stuff we're doing, and then also work with suppliers in the space, create and disseminate resource guides. This is the team. So a bunch of different people, interesting sort of group. You'll see lots of different people with lots of different sort of backgrounds and sort of experiences and things. Let's just start. What do we think when we hear sustainability? Just to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page as what we're actually doing. What is sustainability? Someone, Dennis.
Environment.
Sorry?
It's good for the environment.
So environment's going to sort of feature in that. That's going to be kind of important. And you want to sort of go broader than that?
Literally, it says it lasts.
Yeah, so it needs to last.
Stable and lasting.
Yeah, so we want something that's kind of good for the environment. We want something that's, to last. And one of the reasons things last is they're kind of economically successful. If they're not economically successful, then that's not going to happen. Anything else you want to throw in? Something broad? And this is kind of crucial to this. If you know the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that would help. But if you don't worry. When we mean sustainability, we don't just mean environmental, and we don't just mean economic. I mean social as well. So essentially, it's basically meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So if you see the compromising, a lot of that's the environmental stuff, but the needs of the present are economic. The needs of the present are social. It's not just, we don't want to sort of all be, living in the forest where it's beautiful and churning our own butter, that sort of thing. That's not what we're aiming to do. So the idea is sustainability is much broader. So when you hear sustainability, I think most people go to environmental. That's just kind of, where we've been traditionally. But it needs to go much broader. And kind of the argument for this is you can't really have a good quality of life while damaging the environment too much. You think there's a sort of number, about 7 million people are killed by air pollution a year. That's bad. And then environmental problems require societal solutions. So, if you want the rainforest preserved, you need to think about how the people living around it are going to help preserve it. You can't just say preserve. And also, honestly, we don't want to, we want economically to be more successful. People who are poor are not going to say, you know what, it's really important for the environment that I stay poor going forward. That's not really how people behave. So, we kind of need the economy to be going well, or else we can't really afford to get things going. So how's this something that marketing can aid in? So you might think, well, that sounds good, but what's it got to do with MASB? Well, one of the things, you kind of think, some of the things that we're noticing is sustainable marketing has a major accountability challenge. What is it? Do we know it's happening? Is it working? Consumers often don't believe claims. So you might, a consumer needs to act in order to support a sustainable business. But if they don't really believe there's any difference between companies, why are they going to act? Managers don't know how to financially justify their decisions. This is kind of important. You need to sort of say how you're going to make this financially work. And investors are sometimes skeptical. There's a whole obviously thing going on about this. One of the things I'll say is one of the things we've had is sort of just empirical, thinking about this, from the data perspective. Well, sustainability, often people don't kind of realize just how data heavy it is. It's really data driven. So it's important that, people in our fields tend to have skills that speak to this. Governance, That's an important part of this. When we, I won't get into ESG sustainability, but broadly speaking, it's important to kind of sort of govern well if you're going to be a sustainable company. And so we can talk about like management of brand. One of the key successes, kind of the key criteria for successes, is going to be linking those environmental and social aspects to the economic and commercial aspects. And that's something marketers have a pretty big role in. Actually making sure people understand what you're doing. Why is it good? So that's going to be an important bit. And honestly, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in the next couple of slides is that we've really got, if you think of sort of the broader marketing accountability, a lot of the same issues are actually in sustainable marketing accountability. So we've talked about sort of long-term, short-term, brand. These are all issues that actually are pretty much at the heart of sustainable marketing accountability. So let's see. Well, part of the challenge is sustainable marketing is about the long term and investing for the long term and seeing those benefits come back later. That's a lot of what we do in MASB. And that's a lot of what's really kind of hard because people like things now. And if, it's all about the future and it'll be good and you know what I mean? Like that, you can see why that's a challenge. So we're facing very, very similar challenges. So one thing I've sometimes asked is how, if this is commercially, if it's possible to make sustainability commercially, successful, why are people not doing that? Why isn't everyone just leaping? Can we assume that all the great opportunities are taken and everything else is just, it needs to be left to charity? Well, I'd say this is kind of a bunch of things that I look at. Our impatience. We over discount, generally speaking. Human beings, we like things now. Things in the future, well, or whatever, that's someone else can worry about it. That's not me. We over discount. There's a whole sort of set of work on this, but whatever. Just believe me, we're impatient. I think you probably believe me on that. And one of the problems is if you over discount, you can imagine a simple net present value calculation. You over discount, things that come in the future look less valuable. So we do things that only look good now. And so we take actions that are actually kind of bad long term, but they kind of look good now, so we do them. Job insecurity is one of the things that MASB's talked about a lot. If you're a CMO, you're going to lose your job next year. The fact that this is brilliant for the company in 5 years' time, okay, maybe if you're a saintly person, you do it, but a lot, the incentives are not good. And then we think of a lot of common sense type stuff can often be pretty foolish. We'll take a small win, but there might be a big win. We talked about big changes, big disruptive innovations. A lot of sustainability is about like completely changing what you're doing. And it might be easier to think, oh, we'll just fiddle a little bit here and it'll work. Political polarization. Yeah, okay. There may be some political polarization in the US, so it's possible. And around the world too, to be honest. A lot of the challenge might be that sustainability can sometimes be seen as political. And people just don't want to get involved. They're like, well, we'll leave that to someone else. One of the things we can probably do is if we can talk about this being commercial, it's a good way of saying, hey, this is a good commercial decision. We can make a good commercial decision. Hard to persuade investors of the benefits. This is the tough one because even if you're a manager and you kind of know what the benefits are, it can sometimes be hard to kind of convey them. You know what I mean? You might have satisfied yourself, but the sort of information, and this goes to the next point, that we share with outside parties sometimes just isn't conducive to actually showing the benefits. So this gets to the impact of financial accounting. I think mostly malign would probably be a nice saying on that. Let me talk you through. If you think of a lot of what MASB does, it worries about how to convey these benefits that are not coming through in financial accounting. Kind of think of ways that you might benefit from a sustainability initiative. Well, your brand value might go up. Is financial accounting getting that? Nah, probably not. Almost certainly not. Customer loyalty might go up. Is there a sort of financial accounting customer loyalty measure? No, of course there isn't. You know what I mean? Higher willingness to pay will start coming through, but higher willingness to pay in the future isn't going to appear anywhere in your financial statements. Increased awareness. people sharing your story because you've got a good, sustainable story to share. I ain't sharing anywhere. Other things, innovations, opportunities, partnerships. A lot of things I talk about are how you can make strategic partnerships because you're more sustainable. That isn't showing anywhere in financial accounting. So a lot of the financial accounting records are just, honestly, they're not really helping. And a lot of what MASB does, brand, customers, these are all things that financial accounting has been doing a pretty bad job consistently over. And sustainability is just basically, the same story, just with slightly different terminology. So what can we do? Well, some of the things we're talking about doing is working on the business case for sustainability. What we don't want, so charity is great. If you want to do charity, that's fantastic. But that's not sustainable business. Sustainable business is business. So we kind of want the business to be successful as a business. And this gets back to wanting it to continue. If you do something wonderful, but you can only afford to do it for 6 months and then you go out of business, it's only so much good you can do. You keep it going for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and you can make a real impact upon the world. So we want a business case. And that might be a business case for a specific investment. We're just going to do this specific thing. And they tend to be kind of easier to put in, easier to do a net present value. You've got like a cost, you've got benefits coming in. Then we might think about the entire value of a sustainability strategy. Let's be honest, harder to measure, but it doesn't mean it's not important. And then we might talk, what's the value of certification? You might want to become a living wage employer. How do you show the value of that? How, if you became a B Corp, how do you show the value of that? It's hard. And it's something that we could, MASB can kind of help with. So if we're going to do a business case, think about how we might show business cases. At the last summit, Brand Finance was linking sustainability to commercial outcomes. And you can see how, if you have a brand value and sustainability adds to that brand value, it's a neat way of making a business case, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like, we put $2 billion on the brand value. It's quite a big company. Yeah. We put $2 billion on the brand value. You can see why. You can go back to people and say, that $10 million investment was really, really good. That investment was a bit too good, doesn't it? I've got my book on the customer asset, a fantastic book. If anyone's not read it, sorry, when I say if, I cannot believe everyone in the room hasn't read it and has lots of earmarked copies and stuff. But one of the things in that is talking about how you can use customer lifetime valuing customers to understand the value of a business. Now, if we can just do simple things like say, we've got a sustainability mission and we convey that to our customers, and that means our retention goes from 90% to 91%. We can work out, what that means financially. We can say that means, $10 million, in which case we can say, was it worth it? We can do basic business case like that. When talking about trust in general, good governance can be crucial to this. Talk about risk, Sustainability often is a really good risk reducer. Because, if we think all the companies have been brought down by terrible things that they've done. Tesla. So we can talk. Anyway, I said that quite like. The specs model. So one of the things I do is I took this specs model, which is kind of just like a fun way of kind of getting people to think. Because I think one of the challenges is when you just say sustainability, people often go to savings. And that's great. You know what I mean? We'll put these solar panels on our building, our electric bill will go down. And then you can do a net present value, costs that much to put it on, it's going to save that much each year, it'll pay back in 3 years, whatever. That's great, and that's really important, but it's very limited. There's much more going on. If you've got a sustainability strategy, maybe your employees are actually happier to work there because they really want to come to work. They work a little harder. Maybe, your employees stay a month longer with you, 2 months on average longer with you, something like that. Your customers, maybe just a couple extra buy from you. Not a huge amount, but just a couple extra. We can see these different ways that these come through. So I talked strategic partnerships. Really important. This is a really big area whenever I talk to clients in executive ed. We won't go into whole emissions measurement and stuff like that. But, if you're worried about your greenhouse gas emissions, particularly if you're operating in California, you're operating in Europe, you need to worry about your partner's greenhouse gas emissions. That's kind of one of the things you need to do. And so if you've got lower emissions, that's actually going to allow you to make, get business opportunities that if you had higher emissions, you wouldn't be able to get. So strategic partnerships, new products, new groups to serve with products. Employees just generally speaking, work for sustainable companies. Customers, we should be able to use this in the marketing. We don't want companies to be like nice but quiet about it. We actually think it's actually a public service to say the good things you're doing. So you need to kind of be out there and say, we're doing all these good things. Community, there's lots of benefits to a community liking you. Imagine you just want to expand your premises. If the community hates you, it's much harder to expand your premises and get the permissions and stuff than if they like you. You know what I mean? Just sort of basic things like that. So and obvious savings. You've got a new process, you use less materials, that's all good stuff. So there's lots of good things we can do. These are kind of my list of things that I've come up with, but whatever. There's nothing on this list that should surprise anyone. We can always add more to it as well. So what challenges do we have to address? Well, trying to things we might want to understand, driving the pace of adoption of sustainable practices, how to market sustainability and sustainable marketing. How do we get this across? And that leads to some of the creativity things we could talk about. Reporting issues, as I say, it's going to be an exciting time over the next few years to see how these reporting issues fit together. Because broadly speaking, there's a bit of a delay in Europe. But a little, if you see what's happening in European reporting, EU reporting is becoming like a big thing. US federal reporting is unlikely to become a big thing anytime in the next future. There's going to be a sort of massive disconnect between these two things. California is going to be much closer to Europe, probably, I'm assuming, than the federal government is. And so we see these kind of challenges. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on there. In order to make this credible, we need to talk about greenwashing. So we need to make sure that people are not making claims that aren't true. But we also actually need to worry about green hushing. And you might not know green hushing as much. But this is companies actually doing good things and then keeping it to themselves. And you might think, why would they do that? That's weird. But they might do it because they don't want to be seen as political. They might actually do it because they know they're imperfect. And so if they say, we've made good progress on this, someone else will say, we haven't made good progress there, have you? And they're like, oh, no, we haven't done that. So, So it's easier just to keep your head down and, do some good stuff and then just keep it to yourself or maybe tell your staff. We actually need companies to say more about the good stuff they're doing and credibly demonstrate it. So other companies know it's doable. You know what I mean? Like one of the ways you actually get change is by proving that change is possible. What next? Well, we're going to produce a white paper to elevate the idea of sustainable marketing accountability. We made good progress on that. We're going to start inputting in definitions. Well, we've already put some into the Universal Language Dictionary. We're seeking to collect examples of best practice. So if you've got any of that, that's great. We want to stimulate discussions about the value of sustainability. And then we want to contribute to MASB's work in other fields like ISO, provide a sort of source of information for that. If you want to know more on sustainability, sustainable business, there's a couple of things you could do here. If you're kind of like, you're a traditional business person, you don't want to change too much. Actually, this is about disruption, but Andrew McAfee's stuff is kind of very, this is very kind of acceptable. You could say this in any business school, don't worry about it. And then kind of getting a bit more into this. Some of this stuff is a bit more sort of general. I'm a huge Hannah Ritchie fan. So if you want to listen to Hannah Ritchie's Solving for Climate podcast and her book, Not the End of the World, I think is a really helpful way of thinking about this. Like it tries to sort of frame the successes as well as problems and kind of get them together. And then when we get down here, you're into Patagonia, change brands. I do like the change brand stuff. There's some really cool sort of innovative brands you might want to sort of check out. A lot of them are British, to be honest. Chris Baker's British, but there are some of them here. And then B Corp in general. Once you get into the Chris Marcus stuff, that's going to annoy some people. You know what I mean? That's going to lose some traditional marketers, in which case, you don't read it if that's going to annoy you. So thanks very much. I've got a huge amount on my website. It is honestly the greatest website on the internet. Feel free to go there. But if you want to listen, there's lots of stuff on sustainable business. Feel free to sort of look through that and have a look. So I try to get through that as quickly as possible so we all get to go home in time. But thanks, everyone. Chat to me about stuff.
Well, Neil, if I might bring up one very interesting thing in our discussion is this idea of case studies.
Yeah.
So all of our other MASB teams have compiled case studies relevant to it. And I think that that's something that we as a team on Sustainable should do. So if anyone has case studies, I'll give you one example that came to me. My hometown was hit by a pretty devastating ice storm. Downed us for powers for weeks. It was a terrible situation. But one of the most interesting thing is that there were 2 home stores, the building supply stores, which were completely backed up, hardened, generator backed up, that kept operating. So when you needed the stuff, when you needed it most, they were still operating. That was a sustainable investment that those companies made, because it's not they don't use these generators and these other hardened facilities any other time, but they know that if a natural disaster occurs, they need to be there. And it makes a big difference going forward that, hey, you know what, they move up community brand, their brand presence moves up in the community after something like that.
Yeah, that sounds great. We'd love to do some case studies, particularly if we can tie it back to some sort of financial return. It's really hard because obviously that sort of thing is going to, I actually do believe will be profitable, but
we may have to reach out to the companies directly as opposed to the, you're not going to see it in the media.
Yeah. Anyway, cheers everyone.
All right.